Hello friends, welcome back to the channel. We've completed volumes 1 and 2 of Handbook of Abhidhamma Studies, and now we begin volume 3. This first chapter is titled Advanced Conditional Relations, Paṭṭhāna Continued. In Volume 2, we introduce the 24 conditional relations, the ways dharmas condition one another. Now in Volume 3, we go deeper. We examine subtle distinctions between relations such as proximity, repetition, and association. We see how these conditions explain complex mental processes beyond basic perception, and we emphasize the vast scope of the Paṭṭhāna, often called the Great Book of Abhidhamma. So if you've ever wondered, how does the Abhidhamma explain the fine details of mental processes? How do subtle conditions shape consciousness? Why is the Paṭṭhāna considered so vast and profound? This chapter will guide us. In Volume 2, we learned about the 24 conditional relations, Pakaya. These include root condition, object condition, proximity condition, repetition condition, nutriment condition, and so on. Each relation describes a way in which one Dhamma conditions another. Together they form a web of conditionality. For example, root condition, wholesome roots condition, wholesome consciousness. Object condition, an object conditions consciousness. Proximity condition, one moment of consciousness conditions the next. This framework shows that nothing arises independently. All phenomena are conditioned. In this chapter, we examine subtle distinctions between relations. Proximity condition, anantara paccaya. One moment of consciousness conditions the next by immediately preceding it. Repetition condition, asavana paccaya. Repeated consciousness strengthens the next, like practice strengthening habit. Association condition, sampayutta paccaya. Mental factors condition consciousness by arising together. These distinctions may seem subtle, but they explain complex mental processes. For example, when learning a skill, proximity condition explains how each moment of practice leads to the next. Repetition condition explains how repeated practice strengthens the skill. Association condition explains how mental factors like attention and effort arise together with consciousness. Together, these conditions explain how learning occurs. These subtle conditions explain complex mental processes beyond basic perception. For example, in memory, proximity condition explains how one thought leads to another. Repetition condition explains how repeated recall strengthens memory. Association condition explains how related mental factors arise together in habit formation. Repetition condition explains how repeated actions become automatic. Association condition explains how mental factors like craving and perception reinforce habits. In meditation, proximity condition explains how each moment of mindfulness leads to the next. Repetition condition explains how repeated mindfulness strengthens concentration. Association condition explains how mindfulness, wisdom, and compassion arise together. So these conditions are not abstract, they explain real mental processes. The Paṭṭhāna is called the Great Book of Abhidhamma because of its vast scope. It analyzes conditional relations in detail across all dhammas. It shows how consciousness, mental factors, and matter condition one another. This scope is immense. It covers every possible relation between dhammas. It shows the complexity of reality. For example, even a simple perception of a flower involves multiple conditions: root, object, proximity, repetition, association, nutriment, and so on. The Paṭṭhāna maps out all these relations. That is why it is considered the pinnacle of Abhidhamma. How does this help us in practice? By observing conditionality, we understand how the mind works. We see how habits form, how memory works, how meditation deepens. This helps us cultivate wholesome conditions. We can strengthen mindfulness through repetition. We can weaken craving by observing how feeling conditions desire. We can cultivate wisdom by noticing how mindfulness conditions insight. So, the Paṭṭhāna is not just theory, it is a practical guide to understanding and transforming the mind. Some critics say the Paṭṭhāna is too complex. Why so many conditions? Isn't this overanalysis? But the purpose is precision. Just as a scientist studies molecules in detail, a meditator studies conditions in detail. Another criticism is that it is too abstract, but in practice, even a basic understanding helps us see conditionality. We don't need to memorize all 24, we just need to see that phenomena are conditioned. So, to conclude, Chapter 1 of Volume 3 expands on the 24 conditional relations introduced in Volume 2. We've examined subtle distinctions between relations such as proximity, repetition, and association. We've seen how these conditions explain complex mental processes beyond basic perception, and we've emphasized the vast scope of the Paṭṭhāna as the great book of Abhidhamma. Most importantly, we've seen how this helps us in practice. By observing conditionality, we deepen insight and move toward liberation. Thank you so much for joining me in this deep dive into Chapter 1 of Handbook of Abhidhamma Studies, Volume 3. We've journeyed through advanced conditional relations, seeing how subtle distinctions explain complex mental processes, and reflecting on the vast scope of the Paṭṭhāna. If you found this exploration helpful, please like the video, subscribe to the channel, and share it with others who might be interested in Buddhist philosophy and meditation. In our next episode, we'll move into Chapter 2, where we explore consciousness in complex processes, seeing how different types of consciousness function in rebirth, death, and daily life. Until then, may you be well, may you be peaceful, and may you continue your journey into wisdom.